that do not collapse with a loud explosion. There is no argument, no dramatic outpouring of tears, no climactic moment that gives you time to realize that everything has changed forever. There is only a cold hospital room. A heartbeat is slowing on the monitor, and a familiar hand slowly slipping out of yours. Emily Carter knelt beside the hospital bed, her hands trembling as she pressed them against her father's chest, as if holding on tightly enough could force time itself to stop.
"Dad, please don't go. Not today. Not now."
But her pleas dissolved into the heavy air thick with the smell of disinfectant. The heart monitor let out a long, flat sound, cold and indifferent. And just like that, it was over. The only man in Emily's life who had ever loved her unconditionally was gone. Less than 24 hours later, when the soil on her father's grave had not yet dried, when the flowers Emily placed on the coffin were still wet from the rain, she stood, frozen before a scene she would never forget for the rest of her life. Her husband was signing a marriage certificate with another woman. Emily stood there, 6 months pregnant, still dressed in black, the clothes she had not yet changed after the funeral. In her hands, she clutched her father's old jacket, the one that still carried the faint scent of cheap soap, morning coffee, and the feeling of safety she would never be able to find again. The other woman, Lauren, stood beside Jason, smiling brightly. The smile of someone who believed she had just won. Emily did not cry. She did not scream. She did not rush forward to stop them. She simply stood there and felt her heart shatter into pieces so small she could barely breathe. But what truly broke Emily was not the sight before her. It was the envelope in her hand. The envelope her father had tried to press into her palm just hours before he passed away. That frail hand had trembled, but his eyes had not. "My daughter," he whispered, his voice so weak it nearly faded away. "When I'm gone, open this." Emily nodded, tears spilling uncontrollably. "And remember this well. You are never poor. You are never weak. I've prepared everything." At the time, Emily did not understand. How could a man who worked maintenance at a public elementary school in Ohio, a man who had scrubbed floors for more than 30 years, worked night shifts to buy books for his child, and eaten instant noodles so she could afford dance lessons, have prepared everything? She did not know that that simple man had never been just a janitor. She did not know that at the very moment Jason kissed another woman with the lips that should have been comforting his wife, the clock on a plan long prepared had begun to count down. Emily did not know that in just 2 hours and 47 minutes, when her hands were finally steady enough to open that envelope, the entire world of those who had betrayed her would collapse completely. But before that happens, before the truth is revealed, we need to go back 24 hours earlier, back to the moment in the hospital room when a father, fully aware that he was about to leave, quietly protected his daughter, even from those who would hurt her in the future. Because sometimes, the people who abandon you when you are at your weakest, there is no loss. They are a filtration. And the story of Emily Carter has only just begun. The hospital room was still brightly lit while the city outside had already sunk into the late night. Cold fluorescent lights washed everything in a pale white glow, making time feel as though it had been stretched endlessly. Emily sat motionless on the hard plastic chair beside the hospital bed, her back straight but her shoulders aching with exhaustion. She could no longer remember how long she had been sitting there, 10 hours, 16 hours, or even longer. She only knew one thing. If she let go of her father's hand for even a second, he might disappear. Her father's hand was thinner and colder than usual. The fingers that had once guided her across the street, once held her tightly on her first day of school, now had only enough strength left to squeeze gently when she whispered, "I'm here, Dad." The heart monitor emitted steady beeping sounds, slow, sparse. Each beat felt like a reminder that time was not on their side. Emily's phone vibrated in her pocket. She flinched, as if the sound itself were an intrusion into this sacred space. She pulled the phone out, staring at the screen, which was blurred by tears. "Jason." A short message. "Are you still at the hospital? My presentation has been rescheduled for tomorrow morning. I'm going to Dave's place tonight to prepare. Don't wait for me." Emily read the message twice, then a third time. There was no question about her father's condition, no words saying, "I'm sorry, I'm not there," and no, "Are you okay?" Just a notification. As if her father's dying were merely an inconvenient detail in his busy schedule. Emily didn't reply. She placed the phone face down on the table, as if doing so might stop it from hurting her any further. Then she tightened her grip on her father's hand, lowered her head, and whispered words that made no sound. Out there, someone was getting promoted. Someone was preparing for a presentation. And here, Emily's entire world was slowly falling apart. Her father opened his eyes. They were still bright, still gentle, even though his body was so exhausted it could no longer hide it. "Emily." His voice was hoarse, as if each word had to travel a very long road before reaching his lips. "I'm here, Dad," she answered immediately, her voice trembling. He looked at her for a long time. That gaze was not one of a man afraid of death. It was the gaze of someone afraid of leaving his daughter alone. "Your husband," he hesitated, each breath heavier than the one before. "Lately, has he still been staying by your side?" Emily froze. She was about to lie, truly. She was ready to say that Jason was still good, still caring, still a proper husband. But when she opened her mouth, no words came out. Her silence said everything. Her father gently closed his eyes for a moment, not from exhaustion, but because he understood. "I see it now," he said softly. "I see the way he looks at you these days." Emily felt her throat tighten. "Don't worry, Dad, I'm fine." She tried to smile, but he shook his head very slightly. "No, you're not fine. And I'm afraid, when I'm gone, you'll have to face more than you realize." Emily lowered her head, tears falling onto the back of her father's hand. "Don't say that. You'll be okay, the doctor said." He squeezed her hand, this time with more strength than she expected. "Listen to me. This time, listen very carefully." In that moment, Emily realized something that made her heart constrict. Her father was not speaking like a man hoping to live. He was speaking like someone preparing to leave. Somewhere out there, Jason might be sitting in a warm apartment, laughing with friends, talking about work, about the future, about things that mattered more. And here, a father was using his final breaths to protect his daughter from the very man she had chosen to lean on. Emily did not know that this was the first sign, not of separation, but of a truth slowly revealing itself. That sometimes the trail does not begin with leaving. It begins with no longer staying. And in that cold hospital room, as the monitor continued to echo weak heartbeats, Emily still did not know that the man she called her husband had been gone for a very long time. The rain began to fall just as the coffin was carried out of the funeral home. Not heavy, not violent, just small raindrops falling steadily, quietly, as if the sky itself were trying to hold back its grief. Emily stood close beside the coffin, both hands resting on her pregnant belly, now clearly visible beneath her simple black dress. 6 months pregnant, yet her body felt strangely weightless, as if all her strength had been drained during the long days at the hospital. People say a funeral is a moment to say goodbye, but for Emily it felt more like a cruel confirmation that the only person who had always stayed had truly left. Evergreen Cemetery lies on the outskirts of Cleveland, not grand, not elaborate, just a quiet stretch of land where ordinary people were laid to rest after quiet lives. Her father had once said he liked this place. Peaceful, he said. No one is showing off, no one judging. Now, he lay here. The dark wooden coffin was slowly lowered into the ground. The ropes creaked in the damp air. Each sound pierced straight through Emily's chest. She pressed her lips tightly together. She did not cry. Not because she did not hurt, but because the pain had gone beyond what tears could release. About 30 people stood around. Her father's former co-workers from the elementary school, a few neighbors, some distant relatives Emily had only met a handful of times in her life. No one wore expensive clothes. No one looked powerful. But in their eyes, Emily saw genuine respect for a man who had lived his entire life with kindness and integrity. Jason stood beside her, at least in terms of physical distance. He held a black umbrella, but only over himself. Rain fell onto Emily's shoulders, soaking into her hair, her dress, her chilled skin. Jason didn't notice. Or perhaps he noticed, but didn't think it was necessary to care. While the priest was reading the farewell words, Jason kept glancing down at his phone. His fingers swiped across the screen, quick, habitual, like a reflex deeply ingrained. Emily looked at him. This time she looked closely. That face. The face she had once trusted. The one she believed would walk beside her for the rest of her life. But in that moment, she saw a stranger. Someone standing next to her, but not honestly with her. When the priest reached the line, "From dust you came, and to dust you shall return," Jason let out a soft sigh. Just a small sigh, but loud enough for Emily to hear, and loud enough for something inside her to break. Not with a sound, but with cold clarity. After the ceremony, people came forward one by one to offer condolences. Brief hugs, whispered words. "Your father was a good man. He always talked about you." Emily nodded, thanked them, but didn't truly hear what they were saying. Her mind felt as though it were drifting far away. Jason leaned closer to her. "I have to go," he said quietly. "There's a meeting with a client. It's important." Emily turned to look at him, slowly. "More important than the day I just buried my father?" Jason hesitated just for a second. "I know today is hard," he said, as if reciting a prepared line. "But you have plenty of people here. You'll be fine." He bent down and lightly kissed her forehead. The kiss was quick, detached, like the way one comforts a child just to make them stop crying. Then he turned and walked away. Emily stood there, watching his back as he hurried toward the parking lot, pulling out his phone before he even reached the car. The rain fell heavily. An older woman approached her. It was Helen, the former receptionist at the school where her father had worked. She wrapped Emily in a tight embrace, warm and trembling. "Your father was the best man I've ever known," she whispered. "He lived for you. Always." Emily couldn't speak. She only nodded, rainwater mixing with tears. "A few weeks ago," Helen continued, "he told me, 'That girl is stronger than she thinks.' And soon, She'll need that strength. Emily drew in a shaky breath. Soon. Her father had known. Somehow, he had known. As people gradually left, the cemetery became frighteningly quiet. Only Emily remained, standing before the freshly covered grave, her hands resting on her belly.
Dad,
She whispered.
I don't know if I'm strong enough.
The wind moved through the trees. There was no answer. But in that silence, Emily understood something for the first time, something she had never dared to face before. That sometimes, you may not realize you've been left behind until you turn back and find yourself standing alone in the rain. And that was the moment Emily began to awaken. That night, Emily did not go home immediately after the funeral. Her father's apartment was still the same, the old sofa with worn armrests, the wooden table where he had once helped her with homework, the television that could only pick up a few local channels. Everything was still there, but the person was not. Emily put on her father's jacket and sat down on the chair, letting the familiar scent of cheap soap and faint coffee slowly wrap around her. She should have cried, or slept, or at least collapsed into the chair so her body could rest after the long days. But she couldn't do any of it. The phone on the table vibrated, breaking the already fragile silence. Emily looked at the screen, half hoping it was Jason, half fearing it was Jason. But it wasn't. It was just a notification. Jason had been tagged in a photo. She hesitated for a few seconds, then she tapped it. The image loaded slowly, as if even the phone itself were reluctant to show it to her. Jason was sitting in a restaurant Emily had never heard of. Warm yellow lighting, a glass of red wine, a carefully arranged table. Jason was smiling, a smile she hadn't seen in a very long time. And beside him, a woman. She wore a red dress. Her hair is neatly styled, bold lipstick, confident, radiant. The woman tilted her head toward Jason, her hand resting lightly on his arm, a gesture so intimate it needed no explanation. The caption beneath the photo appeared clearly, mercilessly. Celebrating new beginnings with my favorite people. Emily felt her stomach tighten. She stared at the screen as if looking long enough might make the image disappear. But it didn't. It was there, clear, undeniable. She tapped on the woman's name. Lauren Brooks. Lauren's profile opened, public, filled with images of a life Emily had never had. Upscale restaurants, luxury vacations, rooftop parties, designer dresses, confident smiles posed for the camera. Emily scrolled down. 3 photos below was Jason. Jason and Lauren are standing close together at a concert. Jason and Lauren are on a beach, hand in hand. Jason and Lauren are in a hotel room. The photo is carefully cropped, but enough is visible to make it clear. Posted time, 6 weeks ago. 6 weeks ago. It was when Emily's father had begun to suffer more intensely each day. When she slept on a plastic chair in the hospital, she was rushed through cold meals. When Jason said he was busy with work, Emily sprang to her feet and ran into the bathroom. She dropped to her knees on the floor, vomiting until her throat burned, until tears poured out uncontrollably. Her body reacted to the truth as if it were poison. When it finally subsided, Emily braced her hands against the sink and lifted her head to look into the mirror. She barely recognized the woman staring back at her. Swollen, red eyes, pale skin, a pregnant belly protruding beneath her father's oversized jacket. She looked exactly like what she was, a pregnant woman who had just lost her father and been betrayed. The phone vibrated again. Jason. I just wanted to check if you're okay. I'm having dinner with the team. Today's been heavy. Heavy. Emily laughed, a hoarse, broken laugh, utterly devoid of joy. Heavy. Like burying her father? Heavy, like discovering her husband's affair while she was falling apart? She didn't reply. Another message came immediately after. I'll be home late. You should rest. Emily turned off the screen. She no longer had the strength to be angry, no longer had the strength to argue. There was only an emptiness spreading through her chest, cold and terrifyingly clear. In that silence, her father's voice suddenly echoed, very softly, very distant, yet unmistakable. I see the way he looks at you now. Emily sat down and placed a hand on her belly. The baby shifted gently as if sensing its mother's unease. It's okay, my love, she whispered, even though she didn't believe it herself. Mom's here. For the first time since her father passed away, Emily allowed herself to face the truth, that the man she called her husband had built another life behind her back, and those lies had not begun today. They had begun a long time ago. It was only now that Emily was hurt enough to see them, finally. Morning came faster than Emily had hoped, not because time moved quickly, but because that night, she barely slept at all. Emily lay on her father's old sofa, wrapped in the jacket, which had worn thin at the shoulders, staring up at the ceiling. Every time she closed her eyes, the image of Jason and the woman in the red dress appeared again, sharp and painfully vivid. She no longer cried. The tears seemed to have run dry long ago. At 6 a.m, her phone vibrated. Jason. I'm at Dave's place. I'll come by at 9. We need to talk. It's essential. Emily read the message very slowly. Talk. Important. Those words always signaled something irreversible. She placed a hand on her belly. The baby gave a slight kick, a tiny movement, but enough to pull her back into the present. It's okay, Emily whispered, as if speaking to her child, as if speaking to herself. We'll be okay. At precisely 8:30, she forced herself to stand up, took a warm shower, put on a simple black dress, the same dress she had worn to the funeral. Not because she had nothing else to wear, but because everything else looked too alive for the pain she carried inside. At 9:15, Jason finally arrived. The door opened. He stepped inside, neat and composed, carrying the scent of an expensive cologne Emily had never smelled on him before. His face looked rested, alert, like someone who had just had a typical night. In his hand was a thick, stiff yellow folder. Emily stared at that folder, her heart pounding so loudly she felt she could hear it. Are you okay? Jason asked, his tone polite, distant. Emily didn't answer right away. She looked at him for a long time. This time, she wasn't searching for an explanation. She was simply taking note. I buried my father yesterday, she said slowly. How do you think I feel? Jason cleared his throat. He sat down across from her and placed the folder on the table. The gesture was decisive, familiar, the way he used to close major deals. There's no easy way to say this, he began. I think we should end this. The air seemed to freeze. Even though she had prepared herself, even though she had seen the signs, even though she had known this was coming, hearing those words spoken out loud still felt like a direct blow to her chest. End this? Her voice went hoarse. You mean a divorce? Jason nodded. He didn't look her in the eye. I'm not happy, Emily. I haven't been happy for a long time. His voice was smooth, measured, like a rehearsed speech. We've gone in different directions. You've been busy with your father, with the pregnancy, and My father died yesterday, Emily cut in. Her voice wasn't loud, but it was sharp. Yesterday, Jason. I know, he said quickly. The timing isn't ideal. It's not ideal. Emily laughed, a short, broken laugh, entirely out of control. I'm 6 months pregnant, she said. My father just passed away. I'm sitting here, and you're telling me the timing isn't ideal? Jason frowned, as if she were making things more difficult than necessary. I've already spoken to a lawyer, he continued. We can do this cleanly. You keep the apartment, I'll support the child. We can both move on. Move on? Emily repeated. Move on with whom? She reached for her phone, opened Instagram, and slid it toward him. The photo filled the screen. Jason and Lauren, radiant smiles with the words, "New beginnings," glaringly apparent. Jason looked at the screen. His expression didn't change, just a calculated silence. How long? Emily asked, her voice trembling. How long have you been betraying me while I was sitting beside my father's hospital bed? Don't make this ugly, Jason said, his voice tightening. Lauren and we connect. She understands the life I want. She's ambitious, successful. Then what am I? Emily asked, tears finally spilling over. What am I in your life? He looked up at her, and in his eyes Emily saw something that hurt more than anger ever could. Pity. You're a good person, he said, but you were never enough for the future I want. Those words fell between them like boulders. Jason stood up and straightened his jacket. My lawyer will be in touch. I'll come back for my things this weekend. Then he paused for a moment, as if trying to say something kind. You're strong. You'll be fine. The door closed behind him. Emily sat there for a long time. Divorce papers lay on the table. In her mind, her father's words echoed, calm and clear. I see the way he looks at you now. At that moment, Emily finally understood. Some goodbyes don't just end a marriage. They end illusions. And in that silent room between pain and emptiness, Emily reached the deepest bottom of herself, the place where there was nothing left to lose, and also the place where everything was about to begin. After Jason left, the room sank into silence. Not a gentle silence, but a heavy one, pressing tight against Emily's chest, forcing her to sit still just to breathe. She stared at the stack of divorce papers on the table for a long time. She didn't touch them, didn't fold them. She just looked at them, as if staring a little longer might help her understand how everything could collapse so quickly. Then she stood up. She didn't cry. She didn't shake. She simply took her car keys, slipped on her father's old jacket, and walked out. The road to the bank felt more familiar than she expected. Her father had driven past this place with her many times. A weathered gray stone building looking exactly like the banks in old American films. High ceilings, heavy wooden doors, the scent of paper and metal mingling in the air. First National Bank. Emily stood in front of the door for a second and placed a hand on her belly. The baby shifted gently, just slightly, but enough to remind her she was not alone. It's okay, she whispered. Let's go in. Inside, the bank was tranquil. A teller looked up and offered a polite smile as Emily approached the counter. I need to access a safety deposit box, Emily said. Her voice sounded unfamiliar, but steady. Box number 1247. The woman typed quickly on her keyboard, then stopped. She looked up at Emily. Her expression changed. No longer routine politeness, but something more cautious. Please wait a moment, she said. I need to call the branch manager. Emily felt her heart begin to race, not out of fear, but out of instinct. A man in a dark suit appeared just minutes later. He introduced himself in a calm, measured voice. "I'm Gerald Whitman, branch manager. Please follow me." They walked down a narrow hallway into a private room. The door closed behind them. 2 keys were inserted into the lock simultaneously. A soft, metallic click echoed, plick, like an invisible marker in time. The box was opened. Inside, there was only a large envelope. Emily recognized the handwriting instantly, her father's familiar script. She touched the envelope, and for the first time since he passed away, her hands began to tremble. She sat down, took a deep breath, then opened it. The letter lay on top. "My beloved daughter, if you are reading these words, I am probably no longer beside you to explain everything. I'm sorry for that. I wish I had more time." Tears fell onto the page. "I spent my entire life teaching you that money does not define a person, but I also know the world is not gentle with good people. So I prepared." Emily lifted her head. Her chest tightened. Beneath the letter were thick stacks of documents. She picked them up, put them down, then picked them up again. Bank records, stocks, real estate, numbers so large they felt unreal. She read, slowly, very slowly. Her father's name appeared everywhere, not the name she knew, but another name. Robert Whitmore III. Emily felt as though the room was tilting. A ringing filled her ears. In the letter, her father explained clearly, line by line, without evasion, he was born into one of the wealthiest families, destined to inherit a financial empire. But he gave it all up for a woman, Emily's mother. "My family gave me a choice," he wrote, "money or love. I chose your mother. And when your mother passed away, I chose you." Emily closed her eyes. Every memory suddenly lined up perfectly. The simple dinners, the extra shifts, the times her father refused expensive gifts, not because he couldn't accept them, but because he didn't want to. "I was never poor," he continued. "I only chose to live simply so you could grow up without money distorting your heart." The final page of the documents took Emily's breath away. Total net worth, $5.1 billion, all placed into an irrevocable trust solely in the name of Emily Carter. No one else had any claim. No husband, no in-laws, no loopholes. At the end of the letter, only a few lines remained. "I knew Jason would leave. I saw it in his eyes. And I need you to understand this. His leaving is not a loss. It is protection." Emily pressed a hand to her mouth. A sob escaped, unstoppable, not because of the money, but because, at last, she understood. Her father had never left her behind. He had gone ahead and cleared the way. Emily sat in that room for a long time, rereading the letter, rereading every number. But what stayed with her the longest was a strange sense of peace. The pain had not disappeared, but it no longer controlled her. When Emily finally stood up, she knew one thing with absolute clarity. She was still grieving, still hurting, still pregnant and alone. But for the first time since everything collapsed, she no longer felt powerless. And somewhere, in that stillness, her father's voice echoed, not as a memory, but as a promise fully kept. "You are never weak." Emily left the bank as the afternoon began to fade. The last sunlight of the day stretched across the gray stone steps, warm but not harsh. She stood still for a moment, taking a deep breath as if trying to imprint this moment with all her senses. Not because everything was okay, but because, for the first time in many days, She was no longer afraid. The envelope rested neatly in her bag, not heavy, yet carrying a truth that had been guarded for 30 years. Emily drove back to her father's apartment. The familiar road passed before her like an old film reel. She remembered evenings when her father waited at the door asking if she was hungry. She remembered his low, unhurried voice, always patient, always steady. "Don't rush, my child," he used to say. "The important things don't need to be rushed." She placed a hand on her belly. The baby moved gently, steadily. "We'll go slowly," Emily whispered, "but we'll go the right way." When she arrived home, Emily set her bag down on the table. The stack of divorce papers was still there, silent like an unanswered question. She sat down and opened her father's envelope once more, not to reread the numbers, but to reread the words. "I didn't teach you how to take revenge," her father had written. "I taught you how to live." Emily closed her eyes. For a brief moment she could clearly see the road ahead, not a path of loud declarations nor a dramatic act of retaliation. It was a long, quiet road where every step carried meaning. Her phone vibrated. A message from Jason. "Have you thought about it? I need to know soon so I can talk to my lawyer." Emily stared at the screen for a long time. She no longer felt angry, nor did she feel sad. There was only a strange, unmistakable clarity. Everything was over, not because he had left, but because she had let go. She set the phone down, made herself a cup of tea, sat at the table, opened the papers. The pen touched the page. The ink flowed evenly without trembling. Emily signed her name on each page, slowly, as if every signature were a knot being untied. No tears fell onto the paper, no pleas caught in her throat, only a calm, steady resolve. When she finished signing the final page, Emily folded the documents and placed them into an envelope. She wrote Jason's lawyer's office address on the front, her handwriting clear and straightforward. It was done. She stood up and stepped out onto the small balcony. Night had entirely fallen. Streetlights flickered on, warm yellow dots lining the road below. Down there, life continued. Cars passing by, strangers heading home, stories unrelated to her pain. And that made Emily smile. Because the world does not stop to wait for anyone. And she no longer needed it to wait for her. Her phone vibrated again. "I didn't expect you to agree so quickly," Jason texted. "Thank you for cooperating. I hope you find happiness soon." Emily read the message. She didn't reply. She deleted it, not out of anger, but because there was nothing left to say. She went back inside and took out a small suitcase, not to pack up her life, just to place inside it a few essentials for the next day. The business card from the law office her father had left her, an old notebook, and the jacket worn thin at the shoulders, the one thing she still wanted to carry with her. She sat on the edge of the bed and placed her hand on her belly. "My child," Emily said softly, "some people leave not to make us weaker, but to make space for what's right." The baby kicked gently, as if in response. In the silence, her father's voice echoed once more, not as a warning now, but as a gentle affirmation. "You didn't lose anything. You were protected." Emily understood. Letting go is not losing. Letting go is choosing yourself. That night, Emily slept deeply, the first proper sleep since everything had collapsed. She didn't dream of Jason. She didn't dream of the funeral. Just a peaceful darkness where she could finally rest. Tomorrow she would begin a new chapter. Not loud, not showy, but strong enough to stand before any storm. Because when a woman learns to let go at the right moment, she loses nothing at all. She takes herself back. 3 weeks later. 3 weeks, long enough for a wound to close, but not long enough to forget. 3 weeks, enough for Emily to learn how to breathe normally again, to learn how to walk forward without looking back. New York City welcomed her with a fabulous evening. Reflections of light shimmered across rain-soaked streets, forming long streaks like overlapping paths people choose every day. Emily stepped out of the car in front of the historic Metropolitan Club, a place where power does not need to be displayed, where wealth speaks through silence and history. She wore an emerald green dress, simple but perfectly fitted. Her 7-month pregnant belly was clearly visible, unhidden, unashamed, with no need to be concealed. On her ears were small diamond earrings, a keepsake from her grandmother, something her father had kept not for its value but for the story behind it. Emily arrived early, not to draw attention, but to have a moment to stand still and look at herself in the large mirror in the lobby. The woman in the reflection looked different, not because of the clothes, but because of her eyes. No longer searching, no longer afraid. Only the calm of someone who finally knows where she stands. Guests began to arrive. Gentle handshakes, polite smiles, soft greetings were exchanged by people who spoke more with their eyes than with words. Emily responded to all of it with just the right presence, not overpowering, not withdrawn. At precisely 7:15, Jason and Lauren walked in. Emily saw them before they noticed her. Jason looked out of place in this setting. His suit was well chosen, neatly tailored, yet something felt off-key, like a man stepping into a room he had never truly belonged to. Lauren was different. She swept her gaze across the room with the confidence of someone who believed she deserved to be there. Lauren leaned toward Jason and said something, smiling, a familiar smile. The smile of someone who believes she has won. Emily didn't turn away. She didn't step forward. She simply stood there, quietly. When everyone had taken their seats, an older man stepped up to the podium. His voice was deep and steady. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for taking the time to attend this intimate gathering tonight. Please allow me to introduce the founder and director of the Richardson Whitmore Foundation. Emily stepped forward. In that moment, the room seemed to hold its breath. Jason turned. His eyes passed over her face and stopped. Lauren turned as well. The smile on her lips froze, as if an invisible cord had been yanked tight. Emily stood tall. No smile, no tension, only calm. 3 months ago, she began, her voice low and even, I lost my father. To the world, he was just a maintenance worker at a public elementary school. But to me, he was the man who taught me that a person's value is not defined by what they own, but by how they live. A few gentle nods, focused gazes. I didn't know, Emily continued, that my father had given up an entire fortune to live that life. He chose love. He chose kindness. And he chose to raise me as an ordinary person. Jason felt his heart pound. Lauren raised a hand to her mouth. When he passed away, Emily said slowly, he left me not only a financial legacy worth more than $5 billion, but a mission. A soft ripple moved through the room. No one spoke, but the number itself shifted the air. Emily paused for a beat. 3 months ago, I was also a pregnant woman who had just lost her father and had just been asked for a divorce by the man I loved. He said I was not enough for the future he wanted, and I let him go. Emily's eyes found Jason's. No accusation, no challenge, just truth. Not because I was weak, she said, but because I was taught this. You cannot lose what truly belongs to you. and you cannot hold on to what was never meant to stay. Lauren trembled. Jason gripped the back of his chair. Emily raised her glass. This foundation is for women who have been underestimated, abandoned, who once believed they were not enough, because sometimes the people who leave us are unknowingly opening a door we never dared to walk through. The room erupted into applause. Jason and Lauren did not wait. They left in silence. In the parking garage, Lauren's scream tore through the enclosed space. "You left a woman like that? You divorced her without even knowing who she was?" Jason couldn't answer. Upstairs, Emily remained amid the congratulations, one hand resting on her belly, feeling the small life growing stronger within her. She felt no triumph, no sense of victory, only peace. Because the truth, when lived the right way, does not need revenge. It finds its own path and speaks for itself. Life doesn't change immediately after a big moment. It doesn't explode. No background orchestra, no stage lights. Life simply continues. The morning after the event, Emily woke up very early. New York City was still half asleep. She opened the window, letting the cool air fill the room, and placed a hand on her belly. The baby shifted gently, steadily, like a quiet, persistent rhythm that didn't need an audience. "Good morning," Emily smiled, whispering. "Let's begin again today." She returned to Ohio a week later, not because New York wasn't glamorous enough, but where she needed to stand now was not at the center of attention. It was closer to reality, real people, real stories that had never been heard. The Foundation's first meeting took place in a simple room. No elaborate flower arrangements, no long speeches. Just women sitting across from Emily, each carrying a different story: domestic violence, bankruptcy, single motherhood, abandonment at the weakest moment of their lives. Emily listened. She didn't interrupt. She didn't offer solutions right away. She simply listened, just as her father used to listen to her after long, exhausting days. "We're not here to save anyone," Emily said at last. "We're here to remind you that you never lost your value." Some women cried, some lowered their heads, some held the hand of the person beside them tightly. Good things began very slowly. A month's rent was paid, a course was funded, a free legal consultation was arranged. No one called it a miracle, but for those standing at the edge of collapse, it was a doorway. Emily gave birth on a peaceful morning. Jason was not in the delivery room. There was only an older nurse holding her hand, saying, "You're doing great." Emily laughed through the pain, tears streaming, not from fear, but because she knew she didn't need anyone else to complete this moment. She named her daughter Naomi James. Naomi because the name carries gentleness and vitality. James because some people don't need to be present to continue protecting us. The first months of motherhood passed with sleepless nights, rushed mornings, and small moments Emily had never imagined could fill her heart so completely. She learned to change diapers with one hand, learned to work through crying, learned to smile at herself in the mirror, not because she looked okay, but because she genuinely was. Jason was allowed to visit his daughter on schedule. He arrived on time, quietly, without demands. He held Naomi awkwardly, looking at her with eyes filled with both love and regret. "She looks like you," he said once, softly. Emily nodded. "Yeah." Nothing more. Jason wanted to say many things. Emily knew that. She saw it in the way he lingered a little too long by the door, in the unfinished sentences. But she didn't open that door. Not out of resentment, but because she had already moved past it. 5 years later, Naomi began attending the very elementary school where her grandfather had once worked as a maintenance man. Emily stood at the school gate on the first morning, watching her daughter run inside, her backpack slightly crooked, her hair tied high, and turning back to wave. "I'm okay," Naomi shouted. Emily smiled, warmth spreading through her chest. Jason stood a few steps away. He watched his daughter, then turned to Emily. "You've built so much," he said. "You're very strong." Emily looked down the road ahead. Morning sunlight filtered through the trees. "No," she said softly. "I just learned not to abandon myself." Jason nodded. He didn't argue, he didn't plead. For the first time, he understood, or at least accepted, that there are doors which, once closed, are not meant to be opened again. Emily walked on. She didn't look back. Some victories don't need to be announced. Some stories don't need a loud ending, because the most significant victory is living a life so full that someone's presence or absence no longer defines you. And somewhere in those peaceful mornings, Emily knew her father had been right from the very beginning. Some stories don't end with a dazzling victory. No fireworks, no cheers, no moment where you stand up and say, "I won." Emily's story is one of them. Everything that followed happened very slowly. So slowly that if you weren't paying attention, you might think nothing had changed. But it was precisely in that slowness that the most important thing happened. Emily began to live a life that no longer required defense. No more habit of anticipating other people's moods, no more fear when the phone vibrated in the middle of the night, no more feeling that she had to prove she was worthy of being loved. She woke up every morning with a straightforward purpose: to raise her daughter with honesty, and to live a life that, when she looked back on it, she would not regret for having abandoned herself. There were days when Emily still thought about Jason, not because she wanted to go back, but because he had once been part of the path that led her here. She no longer resented him. She didn't feel grateful to him either. She simply understood this: some people enter our lives not to stay, but to teach us how to walk on our own. And some people leave when we are at our weakest, not because they are stronger, but they are not strong enough to continue walking beside us. Emily remembered the final afternoon in the hospital when her father held her hand and said, "You are never poor. You are never weak. I've prepared everything." At the time, she thought he was talking about money. Now she understood. He was talking about her, about the way he had raised her to stand upright when everything collapsed, about the way he taught her that a person's value does not lie in how many people they manage to keep beside them, but in whether they lose themselves when those people leave. One evening, Emily stood in the small kitchen of the old apartment, Naomi sleeping soundly in the next room. She made herself a cup of tea and stood by the window watching the streetlights cast their glow over strangers hurrying home. Suddenly she realized something that made her smile. If Jason hadn't left, if the truth hadn't been exposed in such a painful way, if she hadn't been pushed to the deepest edge of loneliness, then perhaps Emily would never have known how strong she truly was. She once thought she had lost everything, but in truth, she was simply being given things back, given back the right to live as herself, given back the peace she once believed was a luxury, given back a future she no longer needed anyone's permission to step into. And if you are listening to this story, if you have ever been abandoned at your weakest moment, been told that you were not enough, stood alone among the ruins and thought you had lost, remember this: maybe you were not abandoned. Maybe you were being protected. Because sometimes the people who leave us take nothing away at all. They only create space so that the life meant for us can finally step in. Emily did not build her life to prove someone else was wrong. She built it so she would no longer need anyone to be right or wrong. And this is what true freedom looks like. If this story made you pause for a moment, if it reminded you that strength is not always loud, that sometimes loss is the way life leads you exactly where you belong, please share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment below. Tell us where you're watching Deep Life Tales from, and at what moment did this story touch you? And if you believe in stories not just to watch, but to stay with you, like, subscribe, and join us on our journey through Deep Life Tales. Because you are never weak. Maybe you just haven't realized it yet.